Okay, so welcome to CIS 5620. Today is September the 2nd, and we'll start. This session is being recorded, and you're free to stay as long as you want. If you have any questions, just let me know, and you feel free to interrupt me if something is not clear. Now, I might be calling you from time to time if I need you to get some input, so just be aware of that. Okay, so basically, I've provided you with some information about the cost structure, and I'm hoping by now you're all familiar with that. So what I'll do is we'll start with the weekly learning workload, and we have from week 1 introduction. Most of you from the learning session here, you're telling me you've already started working on these documents here. You can read this at your own free time. You're not being graded on this. This is just to give you some general information. The same thing with these introduction videos. So this is kind of like videos that will help you to have an idea about how to go about working with project management and some of the major concepts in project management. So we'll hit some of the key ideas that are in these videos, and I didn't want to reinvent the wheel by creating other videos because they have the same concept. So the triple constraint, this is one of the key items that you'll talk about today, and what it means to look at the triple constraint. We'll look at the 10 project management terms, and these are just a few. So every subject has a vocabulary, and in project management, there are some words that we use that are part of the vocabulary. And when you're going for a job interview, if you use those words, at least it tells the people that you understand that subject. The same way, if you're in accounting, there is a language for that. If you're in biology, they have some terms that they use that are relevant to that discipline. Okay, same thing. This is a report that you can read and talks about the success and the failures of project management. And I know there are some of you who said you want to take the certification. So I provided here with some information that you can read. And I think some of you have reached out. If you want to get more information about how to get certified, feel free to do that. The CAPM, this might be a good starting point, especially if you don't have industry experience. By you just taking this class, you qualify for the CAPM certification. So I'll be hitting some of the key items that are required when you're doing the certification as we progress through the class. Now, this is some tutorials. They are based on 2013, but the software does not change a lot. Maybe the interface changes, but the concept are the same. So you'll find some videos here that will walk you through how to use the software. Now, anytime that you take a class that has software or uses software, it's always good if you can learn about the software. Usually we don't teach you about the software, but if we'll give you some ideas, we might give you some assignments that require you to use the software. It's the same way if you go to the DMV, they'll test you about how to drive a car. They don't give you a car, but they expect you to know how to drive a car. It's the same idea here. Now, once you learn how to use Microsoft Project, it's going to be very easy for you to use other type of products that are used for managing projects. So Microsoft Project is one of the most common one, but it's not the only one. Are we together?
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so in terms of the assessment, the assignments for this week, I don't know how many of you did the e-learning readiness assessment. Unfortunately or fortunately, I didn't get any input. Sometimes people will share that information with me. I didn't get any this year. So I'm assuming that you guys are ready for this. And I hope the video gave you some, the test gave you some ideas about how to improve if you're not very good at doing that. We get a good introduction with the voice thread, and I think I sent an email that said, if you have not commented on your colleagues' videos, then you're not getting credit. So just go back and comment, and then you'll be able to get full credit. The link, I think, is available until maybe later tonight. So take care of that. Interview with the project manager. This was to give you some ideas when you talk with the real person who is working out there in the industry, and they'll tell you what they do, how did they get into a job, what will they change different, and things like that. So when you're responding to the interview, there are different techniques that you can use. Some people have actually followed the assignment sheet whereby you have question 1 and then you state what the question was and then you tell me the response, then question 2, what was the response all the way, and then at the end, some people have given like a summary of the key takeaways or what they think about that job. So you can use any of those formats to respond. Some people have written the whole thing as a story, so that's fine. I'm giving you the leeway of how you're going to do that. So far, so good?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. So what I'll do is I'll briefly go through the PowerPoint slide for this week. And let me see, did it download somewhere? This was in LAN. We got it there. Okay, save it desktop, and then it's gonna download there. Then I'm gonna open it, enable, and go back. So what I was gonna say is, it's always advisable if you are ahead of your teachers. And what I mean by that is, today we are going to be covering chapter 1 and 2. So next week we'll cover chapter 3, and probably we'll meet around the same time, maybe not the same day, maybe a different day based on the response that I'll get. But what you can do is make sure at least you go through chapter 3 before we cover it, so that when I'm going through it here, you'll have some questions that you can answer, because that's another way that you can learn. But also, if you read something on your own and then you cover it with your instructors, you'll be able to see whether you understood the concept. And if there is something that was not very clear, you'll be able to see where you missed the point. Now, when you get out there in the industry, I think some of you are already working, you're going to be required to do a lot of trainings. And some of these trainings and certification, you'll be doing them on your own. So if you teach yourself that idea of always going ahead of your instructor and then reviewing, you'll actually learn how to teach yourself. And that is a very invaluable tool or skill if you have. So my advice is you should never ever attend a class that you don't have an idea about what is being covered. So if you're taking a class and the syllabus says this week we are doing chapter 3 and you're going to be meeting on Thursday, make sure before Thursday at least you have 20% or 40% covered the material in the chapter. So at least you have an idea of what's going to be covered. Make sense? Okay, maybe I'm preaching to the choir, which is a good thing. Okay, so I'm going to cover, this is an application window, chapter 1, right there. And you probably have already seen this. Okay, you can see the chapter 1 slide on your screens.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for the feedback. So we have a few learning objectives, and basically what we mean by learning objective, these are the things that you should know by the time you finish the chapter. So I'm not going to go specifically and spend all the time through what's called death by PowerPoint, but I'll highlight some of the key points. So we'll briefly talk about why we need projects in organizations. And although you'll keep saying IT or information technology, the concept that we are covering, they are not only specific to IT project. You can use them in any other business. If you're in hospitality, if you're in management, if you're in healthcare, if you're in tourism, you can use the same concept in managing the project. It's only that the book is a little bit biased towards IT, but the concept are applicable to any other area. Okay, so we'll provide some of the attributes of project and then talk about the triple constraint. Remember the video had the concept of the triple constraint, so we'll come back to it. We'll discuss some of the key elements of project management framework, including what you're calling the stakeholders and what you call the knowledge areas and tools and techniques, and how we can ensure that the project is successful. Another learning objective is you look at the relation between what is a project, a program, and a portfolio. And these are concepts that you'll need to know for the CAPM exam and for the PMP exam. So they usually have questions that will ask you for the relationship, the difference or relationship between the project, a program, and a portfolio. And we look at that. We look at what the project managers do and look at some of the opportunities that are available there. And of course, look at the profession of project management. And PMI, Project Management Institute. This is one of the leading organizations in the world. It is the one that manages the CAPM and the PMP exam. Now we have others, like in Europe, we have what's called the Prince, and they have something similar to the PMP, but PMP, Project Management Professional, the exam is the most popular in the world. So that's where we are working on it. Is usually also the one that's most common in the US. Of course, we know the US leads the world in businesses, and most of the concepts in the US get adopted in other parts of the world. Okay, so in most of the organizations, we see a lot of projects. Now, for instance, can somebody tell us some of the leading projects in the world today? Or what you think is a leading project, or some of the projects that are being worked on right now? Anybody? Is anybody there?
Maybe
Yes.
dealing with the vaccines.
Very good. That is one of the main projects that we are working on now. So we have a lot of interest in trying to find the vaccine. Okay. Now, this is a little bit outdated because it talks about 2014, but the spending is also very high. And this is just only for IT. Now, if you think about how much money is being spent on trying to find the cure for vaccine, different countries in the world, they have their employees working on trying to find a cure for COVID. So there's a lot of money that is being invested, and that is an example of what we call a project. So we'll actually have a clear definition of what is the definition of a project, but trying to find a cure for COVID, that's a project, and there's a lot of money that is being invested towards that. Okay, so this organization, the Project Management Institute, usually they poll companies, and they found that by the year 2020, we'll need 15.7 million project managers. Okay, so we're already here. There's actually very high demand for project managers. Now, the COVID-19, of course, it has altered the job market, and there's a lot of companies that are restructuring. I was reading today, and they were saying Delta is going to be laying off a huge number of employees. So that's unfortunate. But we are hoping that things will improve and we'll go back to where we used to be, or even better. But there's still a high demand for people who are skilled in project management. So the jobs are still out there. So this is also something that talks about the salaries. And if I remember, if you went through the slides that I provided, there was a PDF file that was talking about the state of the project management profession, and they probably gave you some information about how much money you make. Now here, of course, you're looking at the top of the cream of the job market. We're looking at people who are on top there, but also even the starting job. Most of them, they'll start with 90,000 and or close to that in the US. So it's still a very high paying job. Now, for you to make yourself marketable, certification is one of the areas that you can actually take to make sure that people know that you have the skills. Because the advantage of certification is it's something that is standard. It's like the CPA. So if somebody has a CPA and somebody else is in the accounting, they of course know that that person knows what they're talking about. Same thing, if you have a medical certificate from a university, they'll know you know what you're doing. So the same thing with the PMP or the CAPM. If you have those type of certification, people will know that you understand how to manage a project, or at least you have better ideas. So any type that depending on which discipline or which field you are, if there are certifications in that field, it's always recommended that you make sure that you get certification in those fields. So the top skills that they are looking for in college graduates, most of them are related to project management, and that is teamwork, decision making, problem solving, verbal communication. And just by doing a simple Google search, if we were to come here and maybe with you, and then I'll come back. So this is This is the tab, top skills in the workplace. And this is just a simple Google search. And you can see we're talking about teamwork. We're talking about negotiation and persuasion, problem solving. We're talking about leadership. So this is just a simple Google search to show you what are the skills that people are looking for in the job market. And you can see teamwork, problem solving, leadership. These are very much oriented towards project management. So if you gain those skills, you'll become much to put you into groups. So at least you can gain some of those skills that are required for somebody to be a good, what you call a team player. Make sense? Are we there?
Yes, yes, we're here.
Yes, sir. Makes sense.
Okay,
Yes,
very
sir.
good. Yeah, so from time to time, just let me know you guys are there because I'm on a different screen, so I can exactly see what's going on your side. Okay, so teamwork, decision making, problem solving, verbal communication. Now, I did comment on your video, and I said most of you are very relaxed when you're making your videos, but if you're not very good communicator, you can actually practice. So in front of the mirror, that's the easiest. Take a topic, go in front of the mirror, and present to yourself. Assume you're doing a job interview, and somebody asks you, "Tell me about yourself." How do you answer that question? Okay. Somebody asks you, "Tell me about a time that you had to solve a problem." How do you answer that question? Okay, because verbal cues are very important. We are going to look at that when you look at communication, but research has shown 70 to 93% of the communication is through the verbal cues. And if this is going to be maybe the new normal, most of the interviews are going to be conducted online. So we need to make sure that we are comfortable in communicating. And as a project manager, communication is very important, because a question that usually comes in the CAPM exam and the PMP exam, they should like to ask you, how much time does a project manager spend communicating? So what do you think is the answer? Somebody? How much time on a scale of 1 to 100? How much time does a project manager spend in communicating? Is it 20%, 40%, 60%, 90%?
I say 80%.
Yeah, that's very good. It's actually 90%. So project managers, they spend 90%, because remember, the job of a project manager is not to do the job per se, if I may use that word. The job of a project manager is coordination. You don't have to be the smartest person in the project, but you need to be the person who can do the best coordination. You need to be the best people person so that you can enhance the skills. So that's the job of a leader. A leader does not need to be the know-it-all. Okay. If you hear a leader who says, "I'm the only one who can do it," that should raise some red flags, because leaders, they harness the skills of other people. That's the job of a leader. The same thing with a project manager. A project manager is a leader. So we need people who are skilled in project management, because companies waste a lot of money. Okay, so $1 billion spent on projects according to PMI Pulse of the Profession, and this is waste, 109 million, which is almost what, 10%? So you can see there's a lot of wastage. And I need you to note, by the time we are all done with this pandemic, there will be an uproar, because there's a lot of money that's going to be wasted when you're trying to find the cure. Because usually what will happen is, when people are desperate and they're looking for something, sometimes they don't follow all the rules, the regulation, the things like that, and things fall through the cracks. So we need people who are very skilled in project management to make sure that we are saving organizations money. Okay, so we'll not go through all this, but it's just to show you in terms of the success of the projects and how many projects are not doing very well and how companies need to improve. So that's why we need people who are skilled in project management. So if companies are using project management, so with project management, we say is a formal way of doing things. Okay, so project management is a formal way of doing things, and it'll give a the better definition of project management. But we are saying that if companies use project management, then they have a better control of their finances, their physical, and also human resources. Human resources is the human beings who are working in the project. So you treat Companies, most of them, look at what they did best, and then they see at what they did not do very well, and then they quantify the knowledge. And if they're working on something similar in the future, then they try to minimize what? Repeating the mistakes. So that's how they end up with projects that are shorter in time. And then, of course, you lower the cost because there's no much wastage. You have higher quality and increased reliability of your products. You have profit margins. So what's the formula for profit? How do you compute profit? Profit equals to what? Revenue. Can somebody finish that? Profit equals to what? Equal formula before? Okay, so we're saying profit equals to revenue minus cost. So if your cost is low, what happens to your profit? It's going to be high. If your revenue is high and the cost stays the same, what's going to happen to your profit?
Make more profit.
It's going to go high, correct? So you can see all these are related because you're saying lower cost. So that's the lower cost here. You have higher quality and increased reliability. So if your products have higher quality, what will mean what? You can sell more of them. Okay. And then if your products are of higher quality, it means they are more what? Reliable, and you can improve what? Productivity. Okay. How do you compute productivity? What is the formula for productivity? Is it input over output or output over input? Anybody there?
Output over input.
Okay, very good. So you have output over the input. So how do you improve that formula? So somebody said it's output over what? Over input. So output is what you get over what you're putting in, correct?
Yeah.
So if you have a value like what? 5 divided by 3, is that going to give you a whole number or a full number? I'm sorry, is that going to give you a number that's greater than 1, correct?
Yeah.
5 divided by 3, because your output is higher than what? Than the input. So how do you improve your productivity? How do you make sure that the value that you're getting? So instead of getting 5 over 3, or let's actually get a number that's easier for you to see. So if we have 6 divided by 3, that's going to give us what? 2, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how can you make sure that you get a number that's greater than 3? You increase your what?
Increase your output.
Exactly. So if you have a 7, and how do you improve your output? By being more what? Efficient. Okay. So you improve your output by being more efficient and by lowering your what? Your cost. So if you are making cars, you can be more efficient, making sure that you have less waste. Your employees are not wasting a lot of time. That's going to improve your what? Your productivity. So you can see how all these are what? Related. If your costs are low, you can improve your productivity. If your productivity is improved, you have higher profit margins. If you improve your quality, you can improve your revenue, and on like that. So you see the internal coordination is very, very important. Internal coordination. What does that mean in an organization? If you take the example of Walmart, the way their stores are stocked, they make sure that they are not spending a lot of their resources on storage. So they make sure that when the items come in, they are taken directly to what? To the shelf. The same thing if you're doing the manufacturing. If you have the windscreen that are required for the car, they only come to the factory when they are needed. So that's environment. So these are some of the advantages that you find for companies that are using project management. Any questions? I just need one answer. So you might
No.
have to volunteer. Okay. So now you see the reason why I said you need to read ahead of the professor, because now if, as I'm assuming you read, but then you have to question these things, okay? Because you have to think about, okay, how does productivity come in? How does profit margin come in? How does high quality? And this is the hallmark of project management. These are the reasons why we are learning about project management, because at the end of the day, we are working in an organization, and organizations, they have a goal, they have a strategy. They want to create profit, they want to create a product, they want to offer a service, and that service has to meet one of these goals. Okay. Okay, so what is a project? A temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. This is the official definition from the PIM book. So PIM book stands for what? Somebody? What is the full for this? PIM book stands for what? Are you getting disconnected?
It stands for Project Management Book of Knowledge.
Okay, very good. So it's project management body of knowledge. You're on the right path. Project management body of knowledge. So they have given this definition. They have actually moved from chapter 1, from the 5th edition. Now they're in the 6th edition. Okay, which came up, I think, 2016, 17, around there. But the concepts are still the same. So when you take the PMP or the CAPM exam, they might ask you, and usually it's multiple choice. So you might see some different definitions of what a project is. But what we are saying is a project is a temporary endeavor. So project is temporary. That's crazy, right? Because you're saying it's temporary. And yet we know that a project can take how long? How long do you think is the longest project? Give me a number. How many years?
5.
5 years?
Yeah.
Okay, somebody else?
25.
25 years? Okay, so those are good answers. The project of taking a man to Mars, when are we projecting that to happen? Mars, when are we planning to take somebody there?
In the next 5 to 10 years, I guess.
Okay, how long have we been trying to do that? A long time. Now, if you go to NASA on their website, you'll see they have projects that have been on for the last 40 years, some even 50 years. So some projects take long duration. So a project can be one day or it can be tens of years, but it has a beginning and an end. That's the main distinction of a project. It has a beginning and an end. Every project will have a beginning, it will come to an end, and then is unique. So that's another definition of project. A project is unique. There is no project that is like any other one. Okay, I think it's Full Metal Jacket that says this gun is blah 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 blah. But anyhow, so every project is what is unique, and it can be either a product, a service, or a result. So the main difference between a project and operations, human resource, payroll, those are what you're calling operations. Those are the things that you do to maintain what? A business. So that's a distinction that you need to be aware of, especially in the exam for the CAPM and the PMP. They ask you the difference between a project and an operation. So project will end when the objectives have been reached. That's one way in which we can end a project, or they have been terminated. There are very many projects that are terminated because they are either becoming what's called a white elephant. Why do we call them white elephants? Have you heard of last time a project being called a white elephant? Somebody? Boardman, have you heard of a project being called Elephant?
It's difficult to go about or work on.
Okay, so do we have white elephants? Are there white elephants out there in the jungle?
Yeah.
You have seen a white elephant?
No, oh,
Jeff,
you
you
mean a
saying you have
white
seen a white
elephant? Oh
elephant?
no. No,
Yeah, they
I
might
don't
have
know if
some
it's a white
trailers and things like
elephant.
that. Okay, so I mean, maybe somebody painted it, maybe an albino elephant. But anyhow, usually we don't have white elephant. So white elephant is a project that is
Yeah, we don't have
taking
white
in money, and it doesn't give any result. So sometimes those kind of projects are going to be stopped or terminated. The DoD, if you Google online, DoD, they have very many projects that have been terminated. Some of them after costing billion and billion of dollars. Okay, so project can be long or large, and it can take a long time to finish. We already did that. So this is some of the examples of projects, and some of you might have worked on them. A team of students creating a smartphone, driverless car. There are companies that's working on the driverless car. I think they already finished that. Tesla. How much are the stocks now?
Mercedes also has some.
Mercedes has one, yeah. So how much are Tesla stocks now? I think they did the stock split, right? A little bit of digressing. You're taking
Yeah,
your
they did
MBA.
that.
So how much are they? How much are the stocks? What was the closing price today?
44.
444.
447. 447.
Okay. And they did a four-way split.
Yeah, I think so.
That's not bad. So your MBA, you should start to think about those areas. Okay, what's happening in the stock market, because that's going to impact your career down the road. Okay, so these are some of the things that also have been worked on. Computing everywhere, we're already aware of that. The Internet of Things, are you familiar with that? When you hear the Internet of Things, what comes to your mind?
How about Alexa?
Alexa, yep. So the fridge, there's some fridge out there that can actually give you a menu, right? No, was a recipe based on the items that you have in your fridge. So that's what you talk about the Internet of Things, is whereby most of the things are now communicating. They have internet capability, 3D printing, that's already passed, advanced surface, even invisible analytics. So we have data everywhere, and we can use facts to make decisions. Okay, so Alexa is one of them. Okay, so and productive apps, we won't go through all these things. You can read this on your own time. So we talked about this, what are the attributes of a project, and the key thing here is what is called a project sponsor. So this is a word that you'll hear a lot. Okay, so this is usually the person who provides the direction and usually the funds for the project. So this is usually the sponsor or the customer. In some areas, they are referred to as the customer. Now, another characteristics of project, it is that okay, so something that you've never done before, there's going to be some risk involved. So that is a major attribute of a project. There is risk, and that's why there is an area, a whole what you call the knowledge area, kind of like a chapter that just talks about how to manage the risk in the project. So we'll talk about that. So you might think that maybe, I think some of you are in construction industry and Centro is building maybe student union, and you think maybe that's not something that is unique. They might have built another student union, but it's not the same as the one they're doing now. Okay, so that's why we say projects are usually considered unique, and they're going to have some uncertainty. And you can see now what happened with COVID. When they started working on that project, nobody thought about the COVID, right? But now when COVID came about, they had to adjust their workers. Maybe they couldn't have all the workers at site, and the project was supposed to be finished in maybe 18 months. Now they had to extend the time. That means more cost maybe, and there might be some regulations. There might have been some clause in the contract saying that if you finish earlier, we give you a bonus. If you finish late, You're gonna give you, we're gonna fine you, so they have to go back and make those changes. So that's part of the uncertainty. That's the risk. And we are going to be looking at risk, and there are different ways in which you can manage risk, and also we have different types of risk. Okay. So we talked about the project and program managers, and we have project managers. So these are people who will work on project. They work with sponsors, the team, and other people who are involved in the project, usually what we call the stakeholders. And then if you have a company that has more than one project, usually they group all the projects together into what we call a program. Okay, so you'll see that in the exam, they ask you the difference between a project and a program. So usually a program is a group of projects. Okay, and then program managers oversee the programs, and then they act as the bosses of the project managers, because project managers work on specific projects, and then program managers, they're on top, they are working on a program, and the program is made up of different projects. So it's kind of like a dean of a school. So the dean of the school is in charge of the different departments, if you think of departments as a project. So that's how that goes. Okay, triple constraint. If you have sat in a project management class, you need to know what is the triple constraint. Okay, so the triple constraint is nothing else but is three elements of a project, and this is what you call the scope. And scope is nothing else but is what is it that we are doing in this project. Okay, for the COVID vaccine, they are trying to find a vaccine that can help cure or prevent the spread of COVID. Find the cure. That is the scope. The cost, how much is it going to cost us to find that cure? And the time, what is the duration for us doing that? Okay, so if you've been following the news, they're saying by the end of the year, we should have a vaccine. Okay, now they're saying at the end of the year. So that's based on what is called the precedent. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the time and how you can actually determine that. So there are a number of steps that you have to follow in developing a vaccine. They have to do the trials, and there is stage 1, stage 2, and then stage 3. They have to follow some quality. We'll be looking at how you can measure and determine the quality of a product. So based on all those, they have what is called the schedule or the timeline that tells us by the end of the year or early next year, we might have a cure. Is it guaranteed? They have uncertainty, because remember, this has never been done before. They have developed other vaccines, but not for what? For COVID. So there is some risk involved that they can go all the way, and by the time we find that cure, then what? This virus changes. It becomes something else, God forbid, and then they have to maybe start all over again. So that's why we're saying projects have risk, but they have some techniques that you can use to help minimize what? The risk. Are we together?
Yeah.
So as a project manager, your job is to try to minimize this. So it's called the constraint, because what you're trying to do is you make sure that if you are given the scope, if you're working on a project, you don't go out, you don't overextend and do too much. Okay, if you're working on the cost and you're told this project is going to cost XY dollars, you make sure that you don't go outside of that. If you're told this should be taking what, 6 months or 4 years or 10 years to do that, you make sure that you stay within what, that time scope. So the cure, finding the cure for COVID, there is a budget that has been set, and they have the time frame. They are working with maybe at the end of the year to find one, and there is the scope. We're just trying to find the cure. Now, how is it that going to be? Is it going to be an injection? Is it going to be something that you take? Okay, so if they're working on the injection, they will stay with that, work on the injection part, and then maybe somebody will be working on what, the tablet or something like that. But that's what you mean the scope. Don't try to develop this the tablet and the vaccine at the same time, if that was not the original plan. So the scope is like the plan, and then you as a project manager, you're trying to make sure that you stay within that. So you're constrained within those three, you're boxed in. And most of the project, when you hear that a project is not successful, is because it went out of this. So either the cost became too much, or the time extended, or the scope. So there is what you'll hear being called the scope creep. The scope creep is whereby people start adding things. So you're building a house and it's supposed to be 6-story, and then somewhere somebody comes and say, let's make it 7-story. Okay, that's what is called scope creep, and that is going to add the budget, and it's going to add what? probably the time. So as a project manager, you have to make sure that you're staying within the scope. So this is something that you'll come across in the exam, CAPM, PMP, and if you go for a job interview, they might ask you to mention about the triple constraint. So just note about that. Okay, so definition of project management, we're saying is what? Application of knowledge, skills, tools, and technique to project activities to meet project requirements. You don't have to cram these, but at least understand there is the knowledge. How do you get knowledge? You got to be reading. That's why we're here. How do you get the skills? By doing. There are going to be some tools that you're going to use to help you work on project. So if you're not good at Excel, that's one of the tools that you can use to help you manage a project. Microsoft Excel is a tool. There are also some techniques. How do you determine if a project is feasible, whether you should be working on that project? How do you determine the return on investment on a project? There is a technique for doing that. Okay, we just went through some of the techniques of determining the profitability. There is an equation that you can use to help you do that. For profit, we said is revenue minus what? Cost. And then we went through productivity. We said is output over the input. That's what we mean by the technique. So you combine all these, your knowledge, your skills, and then you have the tools, and then you have the techniques, and you're doing all of those. You're managing the activities because a project is going to be made up of different items, different things that you're doing. That's what you call the activities. And you're going to be meeting what? The requirements. What is it that you're trying to achieve in that project? What is the goal? So that's the definition from theme book. And usually you'll see that in one of the exams. Okay. So we have the triple constraint. We mentioned about that, which is the scope, the time, and the cost. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you're managing everybody. Everybody is working together. Okay, so project management framework. So this is what you call the 10 knowledge areas. If you're preparing for the CAPM exam or the PMP exam, you need to know this. And usually what I tell some of the students is when you go to sit, for the exam, they'll give you a handbook, and usually what you can do is what is called memory dump. So have this in your brain, and within the first 15 minutes, once you finish the registration, start writing things down. Okay, so have these 10 knowledge areas, and you can see we already mentioned 3 of them: the scope, the time management, and the cost. Okay, so we'll go into more details into each of these and see how you can manage that. Then you look at the quality management. We'll look at the human resource management. How do you manage the people who are working in the project? We'll look at the communication. How do you communicate with all the different stakeholders? Who needs to know what when? You're talking about the risk management. How do you manage risk? And then you're looking at the procurement. What is procurement? So procurement is anytime that you're working on a project, you're going to be sometimes getting items from outside. So you're familiar with Boeing, the Boeing Dreamliner? You familiar with that airline?
No.
Yes.
Okay, some say yes, some say no. Okay, so I'm going to share something really quick here. And so Boeing is one of the airplanes or aircraft that was made by Shear, as a Chrome Tab, I think, yeah, suppliers. That was made by Boeing. It's based in Washington. So this shows you the aircraft, and you can see the different components of the aircraft. Okay, you can see that. I was trying to show you the other slide. It didn't pop up. But basically what I did is I went on the online and I Googled Boeing 787 Dreamliner suppliers. And what I was trying to show you is, okay, I think you can see it. This is only showing us 3 countries actually, but it's more than that. So this airline or aircraft, even, yeah, I think it's an aircraft, they sourced the materials from 3 different countries, but there's some website that actually will show you more than 3 countries. And you can see, so we have US, we have Boeing, and the companies that are helping in making the product, Mitsubishi, Fiji, Kawasaki, all the way like that. So procurement is the process and the procedures that you have to follow to make sure that you're getting all these different components, because these parts, they're coming from all over the world, and this aircraft is assembled in Seattle, Washington. So they have to make sure that they get there and they get there on time, because if the wheels, they are late, they're going to delay the what? The whole airplane. So that's part of what you're calling procurement. And that goes hand in hand with what you're calling the stakeholders. So all these companies here, they are stakeholders in this Dreamliner, because if something happens to this airline, it's going to impact the companies, because sometimes even their stock might go down if something happens with this airline on the negative side. Okay, so stakeholders, everybody who is involved in this directly or even indirectly, even us, anybody who takes a plane, you are a stakeholder. You want to make sure that Boeing is making safe aircraft, because you never know where you're going to be when. Okay, so we'll talk about stakeholders and all the different ways and techniques that you can use to manage the stakeholder. Are we together?
Yeah.
Okay, are we
Yeah.
making progress? Are you learning
Yes.
something?
Yes.
Okay, so you have that, and then you have to do what is called the integration. So this is what's called the 10 knowledge areas. Anytime that you want to go take that exam, or anytime that you're working on a project, this is like the main areas that you're going to be working on. So the scope, the time, the cost, quality, and every project involves these components. So as a project manager, you don't need to know everything about every part, but at least you need to know something, because this is what you're going to be doing as a project manager. You'll be coordinating the stakeholders, you'll be coordinating with the procurement, you'll be managing the risk, communication, and usually what you do is you assign other people to roles in this job, because we said a project manager, you are a leader. You don't need to be the expert in risk management, but you need to have somebody in your project who is very good at managing risk. And for the ones who are working, what you can do is when you go back to your jobs, try to find out who is the person who is managing the risk on the project. Find out how the people communicate, and you'll find that it's not everybody who gets all the information. So as a project manager, you need to know who gets what type of information and when. Same thing with human resource. Okay, there is somebody who is determining who is going to be hired, how many people do we need, who needs to be let go, and on like that. Same thing with quality, cost management, time management, all the way like that. So try to find out who in your company is doing that. So we talked about the stakeholders, and these are the examples of people who are going to be the stakeholders: users, suppliers, opponents of the project. Yeah, opponents also. So if you have Boeing, we have other companies that make what? Airlines. So if there is a bidding for a grant or a project from the DoD, we have what's Lockheed Martin, and we have Boeing, and then other companies out there. So even Amazon, I think it was trying to get a contract the other day from the DoD. Okay, Microsoft, all those. So different opponents. Some people will be for the project, some whether that project is successful or not successful. Okay, so these are the 10 knowledge areas, and we'll spend each chapter going through each in details. Okay, so in terms of the tools and techniques, so we'll also talk about that, and you need to at least know what is called a project charter. So this is a document. You'll find this in the exam, a project charter. This is a document that you need to provide to get as a project manager to show that you are allowed to work on a project. So as a project manager, usually you get the project charter, which authorizes you to start spending the company resources. So something I just remembered about the stakeholders, and I talked about the opponents, the project. Now we're trying to find a cure for COVID. Now we know that in the US, there are people who are against the vaccine, correct? Anybody home?
Yeah.
So people who are making this vaccine, they need to be aware of that. That there are people who are against the vaccine, and they need to come up with a strategy so that when the vaccine comes out, they have to make sure that in one way or another, those people either get the vaccine, or they have to have a process to make sure that if everybody gets the vaccine, they don't get the vaccine, they are not spreading the disease around. And what we have seen in most of the states doing is they have kind of like put a mandate in the school to say that if your kids are not vaccinated, they can go to school, and they make a law and things like that. So that's part of making sure that you have a contingency plan, okay? Because it's not everybody who supports your project, and you have to make sure that. Now, another problem that actually we have is I was reading something today, and I'm sorry, I like to digress. And this is something about the COVID testing. I think is minorities needed for COVID what? Vaccine test. Okay, so this is, we're talking about the stakeholders. We are, the minorities are stakeholders in the cure, in the project for finding the cure. But you can see the problem. These are problems right here. Okay, so they're saying, this is Wall Street Journal. COVID-19 vaccine trials have a problem. Minority groups. So we, all the minority groups, are stakeholders in this. And the government or whoever is developing the cure needs to make sure that they reach out to them. Because if they are not including them in the trials, then we don't know whether that medicine is going to work on them. And if it doesn't work on them, then that's going to be a problem. Okay? So that's another way in which you can actually look at the stakeholders and how it's very important for you as a project manager to make sure that you're involving all the stakeholders. So that's where we are. Okay, let me see what to look at here. We looked at the knowledge areas. Okay, so the tools, and we'll look at this in more details, what you call the critical path analysis. So this is a little bit of how the project develops from the beginning to the end, all the way like that. And I see there's a lot of slides. I won't go through all of them, so don't get bored already. And super tools. So these are like the main ones. You don't have to know all of them in details, but at least have an idea. So we'll talk about what's called the scope statement. Remember, we spoke about the scope of a project. What is it that we are doing? A project needs to have that to specify what is it that we are doing. And then we have the requirements. What are we working on? Somebody say they want to be flipping houses. So if you're going to be flipping houses, what kind of house are you going to be flipping? Okay, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, apartment, all that. That's part of the requirements. If you're in the construction industry and somebody says, I'm going to be building houses, what kind of houses are you going to be building? So that's part of what you're calling the requirements. And then you should always have lessons learned. And this is also the same thing that you do in your life. At the end of the semester, you should look at your classes, what you did well, what you did not do well, and then you have a moment of reflection. What is it that you can do to improve yourself? Okay, so companies usually have that. And they have what's called the knowledge management system. So that's what it's kind of like a repository where they put the best practices so that if you're working on project in the future, you can go back there and make sure that you continue working on it. Okay, so that's what you mean by tools that you're working on. So Gantt chart, we'll look at that, and then change request. Anytime that you're making a change on a project, you're going to have what you're calling the change request. You don't just make a change like that. You have to go to follow through a process. Okay, and you have to prepare a document that shows that what needs to be done and when and why is it that you're doing that, and is that change going to impact the cost, is it going to impact the duration of the project, and then it has to go through a specific approval process. Okay, so this is a little bit about some things that what went wrong, what did not go very well on the project. And this is how you can define the project success. Okay, so usually you find this question, the scope, what we sometimes you can hit all of them, but very, very rarely. is maybe less than 15% of the projects that actually do those three, that you hit the scope and the time and the cost goals. Now, if not, another way in which you can say a project is successful is if the customer is satisfied or the sponsor. Okay, they say, okay, I like what this is. Okay, so the results of the project met its main objective. So you're saving some money in the organization, or there is a return on investment, or the sponsor is just happy. So you can actually go over the scope, go over the time, go over the cost goals, and the sponsor says, okay, that's okay with me. That's still considered successful. So those are some of the ways you can determine the success of a project. In the organization, there is something that's called political capital. So you need to know who has power in the organization. And most of the time, if a company, a project has the support of the top executive, there are very high chances of that project succeeding. Because remember, the reason why projects don't succeed is because they either go out of scope, they're taking too long, or the cost is too high. And if the cost is too high and you have people who like that project, they'll keep pumping more money. If the time is too long, they'll tell you, don't worry, we'll give you more money for your budget. Okay, so that's the role of the executive support. User involvement, if you involve the users, there is a high chance of what? Success. Remember, we just talked about the COVID and the testing and involving a diverse group of what? The population. If you involve many people, there is a high chance of that project getting being successful. If you have very clear business objectives, so when you're working on a project for a business, you need to have the business strategy and see how that project aligns with the business strategy. I think Walmart, especially in North Carolina, I think even Food Lion, I think now they're moving towards automated self-checkout register. I think they had gone for a long time without doing that, but now they have done that. So that's part of a project, and that is hopefully going to save the company what? Some money. Okay, so that approach, for that project to be successful, it has to be aligned with the business objective. Okay, so emotional maturity, this is for the people who are working on the project. Okay, somebody who can take a punch. Optimizing the scope, you're working on what you said you're going to be working on. And then we'll talk about the agile process, whereby you're working on the project at piecemeal without working for too long, because that will minimize the chances of the project this class. So when you're working on project, you know what needs to be done. You know how to manage the budget, you know how to manage the time, the scope, and all that. Skilled resources, people who are smart, they know what they're working on. And then, of course, how you're executing it, and the tools and the infrastructure. If you're working on construction, and I'm sort of keep using that, and it's not very good how you're going to be transferring the raw materials, that becomes a problem. The tools that the employees are using to work with, are they very good? Okay, you're developing software and you don't even have the development tools to do that. That can be a problem. Okay, so adequate funding, expertise, all the way like that. So this is for the federal government. Of course, they have more money. Okay, usually the federal government has a lot of money. They have had projects of what's called the bridge to nowhere. Okay, so that's for another day. Okay, so grow the project leaders. This is what most of the companies do. So they develop project leaders and they use tools, project management tools, okay, and templates. So templates are predefined, formatted. All what you have to do is populate it with the information. And if you use template, it's because it has been developed, it has been tested, used before. Okay, so that's that. Any questions?
No.
Okay, so we mentioned about the program and the program manager. I think you can go through that. Portfolio, so it's a group of more than one project. It's called portfolio, and some companies do that. So usually projects are going to be looking at, you have what you call the tactical goal, and then you have the strategic goals. So tactical is usually short term, and then strategic is for the long term. And a project portfolio is whereby you're looking at the whole projects in the organization and how all those projects are contributing to the organization's strategic goals. Okay, best practice. You can look this at your own time. I won't go through all that in more details, but they're saying is an optimal way recognized by the industry to achieve a stated goal or objective. Okay, so this is something to look at the IT, discretionary and all that. Okay, so that's the software piece. So the role of the project manager. And this is something I think you can look at. So these are the skills that you need, project management body of knowledge. So we looked at that. And usually there is a book that's called the PIM book, project management body of knowledge, that go into more details about what you need to know as a project manager. You don't need to cram all that, but that's something that you might need to have in your library. So if you really want to become a good project manager or whatever field or discipline you are in, you need to have a library whereby you store some information where you can refer to from time to time based on what project you're working on. So it's a good thing to always buy digital book, but also if you have digital book, make sure that they're not the ones that you get for 180 days and then that's it. So get the habit of having a library. And something that's very interesting is if you've been watching the news, most of the people who come to the news and all the experts, most of them on the background, what do you see when they're on TV? What do you see in the background? Anybody home?
Yeah.
What do you see at the background? You see a library. They have, most of them have a library, like a shelf full of books.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that's that. Okay, so these are some of the skills that you need as a project manager, and people skills, leadership, listening. We'll go through all this in more details. Okay, so let me see what else you need to do. Leader, manager, skills. Okay, there's nothing else here that is more technical. I think some of this. So this is the software and how you can work with the software. I think there's a part that you're going to be working on entering this into Microsoft project. So note that. That's how it's going to look like. And create some charts. Now we talk a little bit about the global issues and how these are going to be impacting project management. So some of the things that have impacted project management and certification, and you can see how this is going up. So by 2015 toward that, I think now they are almost more than 1 million, but it's still a very good certification to have. That's for the PMP. So look at that, and it's a good certification to have. So ethics is very, very important, and there is actually a section that there's a part that you have to sign if you're taking either CAPM exam or the PMP exam. You have to sign a disclosure or a disclaimer that's saying that you're going to be ethical in all the projects that you're going to be working on, because there are very many opportunities for a project manager to be compromised. So ethics is very, very important in project management. Okay, the software is a lot of them that you can use there, and we said if you know how to use Microsoft Project, you'll be fine with any other software out there. So I think I'm going to stop there for this chapter. Any questions?
No, sir.
Okay, I see a few of excuse me. I'm gonna stop recording here.